Dear friends, who was at RubyConf 2 years ago in Pune? 2, 3 people? That's great. So I could theoretically, I could give the same introduction I gave 2 years ago because I had this photo, and I was telling people this story that I came from Mumbai to Pune on this train, and I talked for like 10 minutes about this train. It was like a metaphor for rails. And people asked me, like, did you really come by train to Pune? And I said, no, it was a joke. So it was actually great. And I had lots of other photos of my imaginary trip. Photos I made myself with the camera, but this introduction is going to be really boring because I broke my camera the other day, shockproof and water resistant. I dropped it too many times. So there's no introduction. What do you mean by this? You want me to speak louder? I can hear some feedback. You guys too? Yeah, so last time I was in India, I was staying, I was in India, but I virtually stayed in this hotel. Oh yeah, hello, whoa, whoa, yeah, my bass voice, oh, hello. So my last trip to India was basically, when people ask me how was India, it was more like how was the Hyatt resort. This time I made a different choice. I refused to stay at a hotel. I appreciate the offer, but I stayed with locals, Gautam and Bhushan, great people. So I basically, the last 5 days I was in Pune, I ate stuff. So once I get back to Australia, I should hit the gym. Okay. Oh, great introduction. What's this? It's a green square, come on. What's this? It's another green square. This? Huh? You get an idea where this is going? Lots of green squares. Oh, a gray square. Wait, no. Lots of squares and gray squares. What is this? Right, it's GitHub. It's an activity chart. And activity chart is a great way to measure your open source activity. So this is actually not my activity chart. Mine is way more green. This is Rafael Franzas, beautiful, lovely guy. And the cool thing about activity charts is the more you do in open source, the greener it gets. It's an amazing concept. And I tell you this because the greener it gets, the more happy you are because open source makes you happy. I'm not going to talk about open source right now. I'm going to talk about open source in 10 seconds. Anyway, oh, yeah, I got this breathing exercise in my presentations. This is funny because in India, you recognize this character. In other countries, they did not recognize it. Every time this slide pops up, we take a deep breath, keep it for 2 seconds, and exhale. Okay, are you guys ready? Okay, 1, 2, 3. So this is mainly for me because people tell me I'm talking too fast. So I have this random slide insertion algorithm in my OpenOffice presenter. I had to hack OpenOffice to insert these slides randomly. So stay tuned for breathing exercises. Okay, I was going to start this talk with a little bit talking about open source. So why would you do open source? Why would you work on projects for free? And the first thing I love about open source is you are creating something, yeah? You are creating a thing that other people use. So creating stuff is awesome. That's probably why you're all here, because you're all programmers, hopefully. And so the creational aspect of open source is something that makes me really happy because doing stuff that actually gets used is awesome. And it's also you do something that you probably always wanted to do, yeah? So it's nothing you get told, like, hey, you have to write this and that, or you have to, I don't know, design this and that, or you have to answer to this and that question on Stack Overflow. You do what you want, what you love. And that is, for me, that's a driving aspect of open source. And while you do this, you learn a lot of stuff. Yeah, you learn from other people. You learn about yourself. You learn about how it is to manage a project and all that kind of stuff. So this guy learned that he should not drink wine from the bottle, but that's another story later. And what also is great about open source is I get really motivated to actually work on my real job, because I did awesome stuff in my open source projects, and so I feel there's two different brain parts stimulated, because one thing I have to do and one thing I want to do. So but this interoperates in a really great way. So the motivational aspect of open source, well, I wouldn't be a programmer so I would not be a programmer if there wasn't open source. And of course, it's not only fun and everything is great, and it's actually open source is a lot of work. Sorry, work? No, work. Sorry, work. Yeah, here we go. So you actually have to sit at the computer, and you get emails and you get issues and you have to fix stuff. And but I don't know, like it's always it is stuff. And sometimes I'm like, oh no, not again, another pull request I have to go through. I mean, pull requests are awesome. Don't get me wrong. But the work I love to do, yeah. And you get like positive feedback all the time. Like people use your stuff. You get like watchers on GitHub and all that kind of metrics that make you happy. And the cool thing is, my favorite part, you can speak at conferences and meet awesome people. I'm not drinking beer on this photo. This is one of the rare occasions you see me not drinking beer. What I also love about open source is that it's sharing, like you share with people. So you do something, and without even having to do, like you don't even have to do marketing. You don't even have to wrap it in a nice package, or you don't have to go to your mom's place, here's a cake. People use it automatically. So and that's a great feeling, to share your work with other people. And it makes you, so this aspect makes you really confident. Like, if you know my stuff is being used in this and that company, and it doesn't matter if that is Rails itself or is it just a small pagination gem, it gives you confidence, and it gives you confidence in your everyday life, not just in the open source community, because you know I created something that is helpful and that helps people, and that is a great, great, great feeling. And just to give you an idea about what open source is, this is not open source, and this is an attempt of open source, but still not. This is my activity chart a couple of weeks ago. This is maybe too much open source. So what I'm asking you is, you don't have to be like an open source maniac and contribute and stuff, push stuff to GitHub every day. But if your GitHub chart looks a little bit like the one you're seeing, you are open. You're actually open sourcing. And I would ask you to try to make your GitHub chart, your GitHub activity chart, a little bit greener. I have no idea how active you are, but in case you haven't thought of this aspect of software engineering, please make your GitHub activity chart as green as possible. I'm going to go into the details later, but first I want to talk about so we were talking about stuff that makes me happy. Now I want to talk about stuff that I'm not so happy about. This is not Trailblazer. Let's talk about Rails. Any Rails users in this audience? 3, 4, 5 people? 6, 7, 8, 20, 17, 5, 4. So basically everyone is using Rails. That's awesome. This is a monolith. And this a service-oriented architecture. So Rails. Rails is famous for being a really, really simple framework. It's easy to learn. It gives you 3 buckets to put your code: model, view, controller. You start writing an app. It's really simple. You add stuff, and you don't have to think about encapsulation, because there is no encapsulation. And in the end, your Rails application, unless you're a really experienced developer, ends up like this. You have huge models, like massive models, views that do a lot of stuff they probably should do and should not do. And you have massive controllers. This is not really a big problem, but it just makes it really hard to maintain a Rails application. And in David Heinemeier Hansen's brilliant keynote at RailsConf, I had the honor to be live in this keynote. He's talking about this monolithic aspect of Rails, and that he does love monolith, and that the monolith is the only solution, and that he doesn't want to have service orientation or service-oriented architectures because he doesn't want to deploy 17 applications. And I'm like, man, I don't want to deploy 17 applications when I write code, but I don't want to have a monolithic architecture as an excuse for a horrible, horrible structure in my code. So my point about is, And a monolith is not an excuse for a horrible software architecture. You can have a service-oriented architecture in a monolith. Yeah? I deploy one application, I still have a beautiful maintainable architecture. So this is basically what Trailblazer is about. But in Rails, if you have more than 3 abstraction layers, it's, oh my God, did you just add another layer? You're too enterprise, man. That's like, no way, that's over-engineering. Like, this must be wrong. This is not the Rails way. It's like classes and stuff. It's like object orientation. No. And because Rails is simple, right? I mean, or easy. Easy is subjective, simple is objective, or whatever. So Rails is easy, and we all agree on that. And yeah, I mean, when I tell people learn programming, I tell them learn Rails because it's simple or easy. But have you ever said Rails is easy? It helps me to structure my applications. Of course not, because it does not help you in any way to structure complex applications. So you can build a blog in 5 minutes, but everything beyond that in Rails is terrible, yeah, terrible. And the problem here is that we only have 3 abstraction layers to build complex software. And I'm going to run you through the 3 MVC abstraction layers not in detail, but quickly. So don't look at those slides. They are just an example. They don't make sense. Look at me. I came all the way from whatever country to India. So a Rails controller usually has like authentication code, authorization code. So it's mixed. Like, what is this request allowed? Is this request allowed to do this and that? Is this and that allowed to do that? So that all sits in the controller. Then you have model code, like instantiating persistent objects or retrieving persistent object. The actual idea of a controller is to fetch models, but it does way more. Then you have what's going okay. Then you have those you have deciders to decide about different contexts. Is the user okay to do that? Is the user not okay to do? So you have authorization code again sitting in the controller, but authorizing business logic steps. And I did some mistake in my slides, so I have to click through. That's great. Then you have, again, deciders to decide about context. You have callbacks and like post-processing logic in your controller. And eventually, you also have rendering code. So the controller does basically everything in a Rails app. And in a model, it's not very different. Again, look at me, don't look at the slides. So you have like form configuration logic and like fields and input and whitelisting, and then you have, I don't know, like validations of all kinds of contexts in your model, and ifs and else, because you want to use the validations in different contexts, so that's all in the model. And you have post-processing logic again sitting in your model. Again, you want to run callbacks here, but you don't want to run callbacks there, so you add ifs and else, and it's like, it is such a mess in a Rails application. I've seen lots of Rails applications, and they always end up like this. Don't look at the slides, look at me. And this is great. And also you have business logic in your models. So basically, everything, again, is in a model. So is it in a controller or a model? It's in both. And the last part is views. That's my favorite part of Rails applications. So you have I don't know, like helpers, and you access models, and you access stuff from the controller and from the params, and you use deciders, again, for different contexts, because you want to do the view, you want to make the view reusable, so you have ifs and else. Is it okay to do this? Is it okay to do that? All sitting in the view, and of course, there's a lot of business logic, and then you have helpers that are supposed to help, but they do the opposite. So you have like functions, they call it methods, but it's actually global functions that encapsulate code, so helpers always end up in a huge mess of passing around variables and stuff, just all because we don't want to have more abstraction. And if you look at a Rails app, it's really, if you look at a web application, it's really simple. All you have is a couple of steps. So you have the request is coming in. You have to dispatch. Is it an HTML request? Is it JSON? You find out the format. Then you use. Then you have authorization. You find out, is it okay to pass through this request? Is it okay to process? I love that I have to click through all animations. Like, then you have validation. You validate the incoming data. Then you have the business logic. So you actually run your code, the code that is your application. And after the business logic, you might persist the result of whatever you do in your request. And I'm getting tired of my thumb. And as the last step, you render a result. So that's 1, 2, 3, that's 6 steps of a web application. Yeah, 6 things we have to sort out. And in Rails, the controller does parts of the dispatch, parts of business logic, a little bit of validation. Then the model does a little bit of validation, persistence, business logic, but also like it intersects with the controller. And the view does rendering and sometimes a bit persistence and a bit of maybe everything of that. So like you have, there's no clear layering. If people are new to Rails, the first question is, where do I put this certain kind of code? And you have like no idea where to put it because we have only 3 abstraction layers. Oh, sorry. So this is the cover of Trailblazer. Actually, the guy in the middle is Vipul, like the guy who is watching us. But the author, the artist, got it wrong. Like he painted Vipul like when he's 50 and overweight. Sorry, Vipul, that was not my intention. So so I ran through all those problems in Rails. Again and again, so I've done Rails development or like Rails refactoring for like almost 10 years. So I started with 1.2.3, and I've seen the same problems, the problems that we just talked about in every application. It doesn't matter if it was on the southern hemisphere, northern hemisphere, India, Sydney, Germany. It's always the same problem. You have no idea where the code sits, and instead of conventions, you find a mess. So I started to work on new abstraction layers. I was over-engineering. Oh yeah, and it's fun. So Trailblazer basically gives you a couple of new places or new buckets where you put code, the way you structure code. And as you can see in this amazing diagram, I'm really good at diagrams, in case you haven't noticed. So what you can see is that the original MVC layers of Rails are still there. But instead of mixing all those, instead of mixing layers and having different responsibilities, we have actually layers with one responsibility, single responsibility and all that kind of stuff. So every layer is responsible for one task. Great. Are you ready? Great. And the way Trailblazer works, I have no idea, but let's see. So I already told you we have different abstraction, we have new abstraction layers, new buckets for code. So the first thing I really love about Trailblazer is controllers end up as really simple, lean endpoints. Controllers have no business logic. No business logic is to be found in the controller. Controllers instantly delegate to what we call an operation. So in Trailblazer architecture, you will find lean controllers that are HTTP endpoints and nothing else. Yeah? So HTTP logic, controller, nothing else. Okay? And that's really simple. The next thing is the models in Trailblazer are beautiful. Models in Trailblazer have persistence and persistence only. So a model in Trailblazer could be, in this example, it's active record. It could also be, I don't know, ROM or whatever. So there's no restrictions to the actual object relation mapper you use, but all you do is you have associations configured, and you have configurations and finders in the model. So you have really beautiful models. I mean, look at this model. It's great. Like, I love this. The next thing is you still can use the old Rails views for a controller. I hate Rails views, and you're going to learn why in a second. But so it's still okay to have normal views and partials and all that stuff. So Trailblazer doesn't restrict you. You can use Rails, the Rails way, everywhere you want. It just offers you additional abstraction layers. So if you want to use Rails views, if you want to be sad, if you want to be unhappy, use Rails views. If you don't want to be unhappy, if you want to be happy like I am, woohoo, I'm happy, you use cells. Cells is a new, or not a new, actually, it's my oldest gem, which is a view component gem. So it helps you to encapsulate fragments or entire pages into widgets, into object-oriented objects. Objects are amazing. What do you think about objects? So cells is very simple. So a cell represents a fragment in your page. And you call the cell, ironically, by using a helper. The details don't matter. But so basically, you say, hey, cell, please render yourself. And a cell is implemented as a class. So every fragment is an object-oriented class. And as you can see, there's a show method. So every cell needs a show method. The show method can render a template. And this is a little bit like a controller. There's a different directory structure. But the views in a cell are really simple. So when I call render, it'll render the show view, the show handle view, or the show ERB view of that cell. And in that cell, you do not have logic. You can have method calls, you can have ifs and else if you want that, and you can have loops, all that kind of stuff. You can also have logic, but cells makes it really simple to encapsulate or to delegate logic back to the cell. So for example, in this view, I call the avatar method, and this method is called directly on the cell instance. So we don't have this concept of helpers anymore. If you use a method or a variable in the view, this is called on the cell instance directly. So basically, you have an object, a Ruby object, representing a fragment of your screen. And this is so much cleaner than the way it is done in Rails. We don't have to copy instance variables and helper methods to the view back and forth. An object represents your fragment. And as you can see, I use an image tag in the cell. So you're free to use Rails helpers in the cell instance and in the view. So you can still use simple form. You can still use content tag and all this kind of stuff, because I find the action view helpers, I find them helpful, but not the way they are structured, not the way they should be used in a global view. So a cell gives you a really nice and easy way to encapsulate a fragment into an object with beautiful encapsulation and interfaces. So you know what this fragment actually needs, what data this fragment needs. This beautiful logo. I still haven't replaced the slogan. If you come up with a good slogan for cells, let me know. It's actually really popular, but I found out that India is not really happy about it, because I was giving a presentation about cells a couple of days ago, and no one knew cells. I was devastated. I was about to cancel this talk and fly home. If I can give you any advice, check out cells. You will love it, because it's actually the missing part of Action View. It makes it really simple to re-architect your view to make it more maintainable. It's used by many, many people, and yeah, I mean, I have no idea. If you don't use cells in your view, I have no idea how you actually do your views in Rails, because I find Rails, and especially Action View, a horrible mess, and even the Rails core team finds Action View a horrible mess. This is why there has nothing been changed in like 7 years in the code base. So I'm not sure how long Action View is going to survive. You should better jump on something that is maintained, and the only alternative, I'm sorry, is cells. So after all this negative talk about Action View, let's talk about operations. So the operation in Trailblazer is where the business logic happens. So we have controllers, delegating, models, persistence, cells, doing the view rendering. And now we talk about where the actual business logic sits. So your actual application, and that is modeled in an operation. An operation is again, oh God, it's again another class. So there's so many classes in Trailblazer. I must be doing it wrong, right? I mean, this is not the Rails way. So an operation is like, hey, don't look at the slides. Yeah, this doesn't matter. We go through that now. So an operation, the concept of an operation is to map a function in your application to an object. So a function in your application is viewing a shop, adding a comment, following a shop, checking out your notifications, sending a message. That's all public functions. That's all what we call, what we do in a controller action in Rails. In DDD, we call it use case. Apparently, I had no idea, but someone told me after I gave a similar talk. In CQRS, this is called a command. Does anyone know what CQRS is? Yo. What's the abbreviation? What? Command query responsibility thing, what? Oh, it's a great concept. I saw talk about this, and I saw like, okay, we got use cases. And in CQRS, it's called a command. So every function in your application wants to be implemented somewhere. And in Trailblazer, this is exactly what an operation does. Every function is a separate operation. Excuse me. This is like clipped to my mouth. I can't do anything. An operation is a beautiful blue box. And operations tasks are white boxes. So operations implement your business logic. This implies there has to be quite a bit of different tasks being handled in an operation. So what the operation first does is it deserializes the input, the incoming parameters. Then we validate the input. Then you run your actual processing logic. I can hear another feedback. So we run the actual business logic. Then you might persist, or you might persist. Yeah, usually you want to persist what happened. And then we run post-processing. It's also known as callbacks. So after you persist, there should be additional logic run. And what an operation can also assist you with is rendering. So we got 6 steps, and you might remember the other diagram I showed you. So an operation does the main part of the application, but an operation is not a monolithic beast that has this huge chunk of code. An operation itself consists of several abstraction layers. It's so complicated. There's so many classes. And usually we nest operations into their into namespaces. So in Rails, this means we usually nest operations into the models. So here I have a create operation that sits in the comment namespace. And the comment is an active record base, but this is not inheritance. I'm just using Ruby namespaces to get this beautiful namespace, okay? So if you can have a class in a class, and this does not, the inner class doesn't know about the outer class, and the outer class doesn't know about the inner class, okay? This is just to have this beautiful namespace. So when I talk about how do I create a comment, I talk about the comment create operation. It's very straightforward. And so to go quickly through the steps in an operation, the validation in an operation happens in a separate form object. Yeah, so to validate the incoming data, we use a form object. A form object, you define the fields of the incoming data and the validations. So for example, if we have a really simple form, just a box to add a comment and a submit button, because forms without submit buttons are kind of useless. And if I submit this form, what basically happens is the browser will send this hash to the controller, to the Rails route, to the Rails controller. So the controller gets this hash. The controller knows, okay, my processing entity is the comment create operation. So what basically happens is the controller simply passes this hash, the parent's hash, to the operation. And from there on, the controller doesn't do anything anymore, except for rendering the result. And so given this hash comment with a body, the form object will validate this input, will deserialize this input and validate it, okay? So the validation happens in a separate form object in the operation, but the operation makes it really simple to define this form object because we got this contract DSL. And then the actual logic happens in the process method. So that's the only public method of an operation. This is where you put your business code. And to trigger the validation, to invoke the validation, we got the validate method. So again, the details are irrelevant, but you say like, hey, operation, use the form object to validate the input. And if this is OK, run this block. So if the input is OK, I can save the model, I can run my business logic, whatever. So operations allow me to do validation in a really, really simple way. Oh, I actually needed this slide. I'm so glad it's here. I don't do yoga, but I should start it. Which one would be my yoga style? Ashtanga? OK, validations, form objects, great. Again, the next step is where do I run the business logic? Where do I do my processing in an operation? That's very simple. It happens in the process method. Wow, what a surprise. So if my input is valid using the form object, I can do whatever I want. I can find models. I can let the operation find the model. I can find models manually. I can assign models. It's just plain Rails or Ruby logic you run as your processing logic. So, and Trailblazer doesn't limit you to like CRUD or something. You can do whatever you want in the processing part of your operation. You can find other models, or you can dispatch to methods, or you can dispatch to your own service objects. So that's all up to you. An operation just gives you a frame and a place for defining your processing logic. The next thing is after you run your business logic, you want to persist that stuff. And again, this happens in the process method. And again, this is, I mean, Trailblazer gives you a very, very convenient way to persist stuff. It doesn't matter right now. But theoretically, you could do persistence any way you want. You can create objects. You can create 500 objects if you need that. You can access the validated params hash if you need that. So persistence, again, totally up to you. Trailblazer doesn't restrict you in any way. But it gives you a place to put that persistence logic. And you can also handle like invalid inputs, of course. I mean, we don't have valid data all the time. So you could, I don't know, log something invalid, or you could raise an exception and say, hey, this is all wrong or whatever. So there's an easy way to handle both cases of valid and invalid states of an operation input. The last thing that an operation helps you with is post-processing, also known as callbacks. It's not really callbacks, but so what people always ask me is, okay, with empty models, where do I have before save or before validate code? So it's very simple. Like if you want to have before save, you run this code before you save in the operation. Trailblazer gives you a really nice DSL to do that, but I just want to show you how straightforward, how explicit Trailblazer is. So there's no magic like, okay, save might happen here. Here, you call what you want, then you call save, and you could also encapsulate that in your own method. Of course, you have to define that method in the operation, but it's really explicit. This is an after save callback, so Trailblazer doesn't restrict you in any way how you model your post-processing logic. And one thing that Rails is really terrible with is authorization. So it doesn't give you, like, it's like people never thought about authorization. Like authorization means, is it okay to run this? Is it okay to run that, given that this user is logged in? And authorization is not just something that happens on the very top of a controller in a before filter. Authorization is part of your business logic. So authorization is everywhere in your code. And you know that because you have if user can do this, or if role permits this and that. And in Trailblazer, we thought about that beforehand. So there's easy hooks and places where you can hook in your authorization gem, whether that's Pundit or gem or can or whatever. Just to give you an example, operations have policies. So you can define policies that will say yes or no to the input. So if the input is okay, the policy will say, hey, yeah, let's run this operation. If the input is, or if the input is invalid, or if the current user is not allowed to perform that action, the operation will say, hey, no way, I'm not going to run. So this is just one example, but Trailblazer gives you a very simple, convenient way to hook authorization declaratively into your application flow. But Rails, there's no way to do that. If you have to hack active record, or you have to put ifs and else in your controller, it's just horrible. So basically, you have one operation per function in your application. So this is a completely new way of structuring Rails applications. And controllers delegate to operations. Yeah? So the operation encapsulates your business. You can also call operations manually if you want by using the call method. The cool thing is you can also call operations in a background job or in a rake task using the same syntax, and it will do exactly the same as it does in a controller. And you can also call operations on the console, and it will do exactly the same as in a controller. And the killer feature is you can also use operations in tests. Because in Trailblazer, we don't use factories anymore, because factories always give you a state, an application state that is not identical to what happens in production, because there's always a flag missing, or this missing, or that object is not attached. So we use operations to set up a realistic application state in tests. And this, I know you think about, oh, this is going to be slow and this is going to be inefficient. It is fantastic. Like, people love this feature. You have identical test setups to production. You never have tests running, production breaks. Either the test break and production breaks, or everything works fine. So by taking away factories, we've eliminated a lot of code necessary to set up tests, and we have a realistic environment. It is brilliant. Many people ask me, how do I find the time to write all this crap? The truth is, I don't work. I mean, I do work, but I usually work like 3-4 hours, and then the rest of my day, 3-4 hours is so exaggerated. Like, I use basically my whole day for open source. If you want to hire me, don't do it unless you want to pay me for open source. It's great because you get lots of green dots on GitHub and people think you're awesome. What actually makes me quite efficient, in my opinion, with open source is that I have figured out that recreation is the key to being a good programmer, because most people, and I will talk about this in a second, but a lot of people think you just need to program and program and program and program, and you will be a good programmer, but that's not true. I'm not saying I'm a good programmer. I'm just saying I wrote a lot of stuff and it works. Probably. I got tests. So the recreational aspect, breaks, hobbies, sports, is something we will talk about in a second, but this is what actually makes me really productive in my open source job, not in my real-time job because I don't work. Another cool feature in Trailblazer, to get back to the actual interesting stuff, because I know you want to hear about Trailblazer, not about my recreational bullshit. The cool thing about Trailblazer is we have a new way of structuring Rails apps. So instead of having model sitting in the app's models, controller sitting in app controllers, you have to go through 3 or 4 directories to find files that actually belong together. In Trailblazer, we change it. We have app concepts, comment. And in comment, you find all the files that are necessary to implement the comment concept. Yeah? Adding comments, updating comments, all that stuff, displaying comments, all that code sits in the same directory. And this is so much more intuitive if you want to find out where stuff happens. If I ask you, hey, where do you actually update the comment? You will be like, oh, this might be in app controllers, comments controller, and then app models, comments, blah 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 blah. In Trailblazer, you're like in the comment concept, done. Yeah, I have 2 boxes with stars that point to nonsense. One thing I did, like the example I made earlier with this comment that just had a body was really simple. Of course, Trailblazer allows you to have like really, really deeply nested object structures. A comment can have an author can have an email, an author could also have a location, which is another nested object. So Trailblazer makes it, don't look at the slides. Trailblazer allows you to have deeply nested object graphs, of course. I mean, we don't have simple, plain, one-level object hierarchies. And another cool feature in Trailblazer is we also have nested validations. So there's a completely new validation semantic. So we don't have this primitive Rails way, like validate, 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 validate. And if this validation is invalid, then still all the other validations are run. So Trailblazer gives you a really cool way to structure and cascade validations and all this kind of stuff. So I'm not going into the details, but that's pretty awesome because it takes away a lot of code again. So what we did is we just got rid of active model validations and use an alternative implementation, and suddenly we have rich, beautiful validation semantics. I'm not sure why this slide is there because I was looking for a slide on Google, an image saying callbacks, and this was the first image that popped up on Google image search. Callbacks. Has anyone seen the movie The Pyramid yet? I saw it on the flight. It is ridiculous, not in a good way. Okay, so I told you that post-processing logic in operations or callbacks, they can either happen explicitly by calling your code, or there is another DSL that helps you to structure callbacks to define what's happening. So again, details irrelevant, but it's really simple, and you have to dispatch those callbacks explicitly again. So there's no magic. Save happens and suddenly stuff gets dispatched. In Trailblazer, you have to dispatch callbacks manually. Yeah, there's no magic. And of course, you can do callbacks in methods, and you can have callbacks watching properties, and if this property changes, blah 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 blah, and you can have nesting of properties and all that stuff. So whatever, Trailblazer makes it really simple to work with nested object graphs, changing and updating nested object graphs, and associate different callbacks and logic to those changing elements, not just to one big model. One thing is pretty cool about the operation is that it also helps you rendering, especially when you use operations in a document API, like a REST API. I was just talking to someone back there. I hope he's listening because this is exactly what I was talking earlier. So in an operation, you simply include the representer module. It does not matter what a representer is. And suddenly, when I have an operation instance, I can call toJSON on this operation, and it will render a JSON string representing the object, like the comment. And this is lame because, I mean, this is nothing special. But the cool thing is the actual document is derived from the contract. And I can fine-tune the representation by using the representer block in an operation. So in this case, I add an ID and a hypermedia link to my representation. And what happens is, if I call toJSON, suddenly there is an ID and hypermedia. Hypermedia is awesome, in my document. Again, this is still lame, but the cool thing is it also works the other way. So you can also use this representer to parse incoming data, a JSON string or an XML document. So given this hash, this hash has to be deserialized into an object graph, usually in Rails. Rails has no way to do that. Like, you have to do it manually, or you have to use update attributes. In Trailblazer, if I call an operation with a JSON string, it will use the representer to deserialize the JSON and set up the object graph. So operations work with hashes, forms, or with JSON documents or with XML documents, but this happens in a separate abstraction layer. You can fine-tune, it's fucking fantastic. Last thing I want to talk about is inheritance. You and your siblings should either be able to roll your tongue or not roll your tongue. This theory is wrong because my sister cannot roll her tongue. Maybe we should ask the postman. Anyway, I knew that Gautam is the only one who laughs about this joke. So Trailblazer also makes it really convenient to work with inheritance because you don't want to have redundant code. So update operations, of course, inherit from create. They will inherit policies, the contract. You can fine-tune the contract in the update operation and all that kind of stuff. So polymorphism in Trailblazer is one of the big killer features that I spend a lot of time on implementing. You can override policies and all that kind of stuff. You can override methods just by using simple Ruby inheritance. We don't need this because we have our own structure. Fair enough. Go for it. Trailblazer is an attempt to introduce a new structure and new conventions into Rails, but if you do that on your own, fine. This is too complex. We use Rails way. It's way simpler. It's not. If you look at a Trailblazer application and if you look at a Rails application, you know what's happening here. You have no idea what's happening here, and that is complexity. Trailblazer is technical complexity, but it will make your application code way more intuitive, way more better structured and maintainable. A lot of people ask me, why don't you use Lotus? And I have to explain them. Lotus is a transportation framework. Lotus does HTTP and dispatching. There's no high-level architecture, as we call it in Trailblazer. There's no way in Lotus or in Sinatra or Padrino or whatever that defines how my business application, how my business code is structured. And this is exactly what Trailblazer brings, a high-level architecture. Yeah? Trailblazer is here, Rails and Lotus are here, and this doesn't mean Trailblazer is better. It's just two different things that Trailblazer and Rails do. Yes, so again, Trailblazer helps you with deeply nested models, deeply nested object graphs, and it actually brings schemas and definitions and how do my object graphs look like to the application developer. There's a book. It's on leanpub.com/Trailblazer. That's leanpub.com/Trailblazer. That's leanpub.com/Trailblazer. The book is 92% finished. It's going to be finished in about 2 months, and it's going to be awesome, of course. And I got stickers. So if you want to have stickers, I have 50 stickers. There's about 200 people. If I don't get rid of all the stickers, I'm never going to come back to India. So the last thing to wrap up this brilliant keynote is so coding, like all the stuff we were just talking about. It doesn't matter if you understood everything because I don't understand it myself. But the thing is, coding is not something you just do and you hack and you're like, yo. Coding needs inspiration. Yeah, coding is a creative thing. It's not like something you just, it's not, I mean, sorry for this analogy, but it's not like you build up a brick wall and there's a brick wall. Coding is art. You have to think, you have to be inspired. So I looked up inspiration on Wikipedia. The article is so boring. It's like, yeah, inspiration is the breath of gods, and there's like 3 paragraphs defining inspiration. I was really, really disappointed. But one thing I found interesting was inspiration links to the invention definition on Wikipedia. So apparently you need to be inspired to invent stuff. So when we write code, we invent stuff. And Being inspired does not come from technology. So don't tell me, oh, I'm waiting for my new MacBook Air, or I'm waiting for my new iPhone, or I'm waiting for this, or I need a new computer, I need a bigger screen, I need 5 screens. This will not give you inspiration for your coding. Coding is a thing that happens in your heart and in your mind. So technology does not help you. And also overworking does not help you. You're not going to get better, you're not going to write better programs just because you stay till midnight at the office. Coffee doesn't help as well. Coffee does help, or chai. But again, like if you think you can be inspired by staying and working and smashing the code lines, next day you come to the office, you're like, Jesus Christ, did I really write that? So what I'm trying to say is take breaks. Yeah, take breaks either during the day, take breaks during the week, take breaks during your entire life, because this is how you get inspired. You're not gonna write beautiful code, beautiful architectures if you're stressed. Take breaks, and think about your recreational setup in your life. No one tells you you have to come to work 12 hours. I mean, maybe they do, but then it's up to you to change your job. If you don't have time for hobbies, if you don't have time for sports, recreation, cooking, hanging out with your friends, that's all because you have to think about this. Coding it stimulates just one part of your brain, but your brain wants to be worked out. So you have to stimulate other parts of your brain. And this is exactly how inspiration will flow. Otherwise, you will just be stressed. So think about your life. Is it okay? Am I stressed? Am I feeling all right? Am I inspired, or am I just stressed when I come to work? It's up to you to change it. So again, famous last words. So to wrap this up, don't confuse monolithic software with an excuse for a horrible, shitty software architecture. You can have service orientation in a monolith, and it's still going to be awesome. Buy the Trailblazer book. Trailblazer gives you a lot of new abstraction layers to actually have a beautiful architecture in a monolith. It's pretty awesome. You should check it out. Take breaks. Take breaks. I told you. Don't overwork yourself. You're not going to be inspired, and your code is going to be messy. And be nice to each other. Thank you very much.
All right. We have time for maybe a couple of questions, because Nick has very wisely used all the time.
I don't take questions, never. I use my talk time like to the very end, and then if you have questions, you have to come and talk to me and maybe get a sticker if I still have some left.
All right, we got one question here.
Oh, we do actually questions.
Let's do some questions.
Yeah, thanks, Nick, for the wonderful presentation. Actually, I had a question on the cells framework that you showed. Is it similar to the React, where you actually create components and kind of for the view?
So the question is cells similar to React, right?
Yeah.
The thing is, React happens in the front end in the browser. Cells is kind of the counterpart in the back end, and we are actually working on making this smooth. So you have this cell backing a React component. So that's my dream. That's really one of the things I want to achieve in the next year, is to have React, because I'm really interested in React and Flux and all that stuff, to bind that to cells, so you have like Ruby, JavaScript binding without all the pain. Good question. Thank you.
Okay. And there's one more question. We'll take that as the last one.
Hey, Nick, thank you. It was a really good presentation where we had once talked about the presenters and all, and looking that into action as the operations and representer. That's really good. My question here is that in case nowadays we are turning a lot towards a Rails application which is just serving the API, and the view part is not available. So in that case, I want to make my Rails application in such a way where it is doing a less processing at all. So in that case, do you think it's a good idea to still include operations? Because ultimately, of course, I want a cleaner code, and I don't want my controller to be messed up. So what do you think?
So you say your application is mainly API?
Yes.
I mean, but API means, you know, an API still has to process a lot of data and still has to pass incoming documents and run business logic. So of course, an operation is perfectly suited for that because, I mean, API is nothing but a Rails app without a HTML front end. So Trailblazer is actually more about backends. Yeah, the cells example I just showed was a front end feature, but Trailblazer is actually more in the back end. It helps to restructure the back end. And if you have an API application, operations are the way to go to structure your processing code.
Right. So if I could just extend my question, sorry to take a little bit more time, but it's like when you create an API, you tend towards removing all the other tendencies where a lot of gems are coming up for removing the dispatchers and all. So in that case, have you ever tried using those gems along with the operations, and have you seen that working well?
Okay. No, I mean, Trailblazer doesn't restrict you to a certain way how you dispatch and all this stuff. So if you want to use an operation in Grape or with Rails API, so Trailblazer is not even limited to Rails. So you can use whatever gems you want. You don't even have to use every feature of Trailblazer, but it is always a good idea to structure your code. And if you feel like using operations in Grape or in Sinatra, or I don't know which gems you use, but it is totally up to you. An operation is a self-contained object without any dependencies.
Sure. Thank you.
Thank you.
All right. Thanks a lot, Nick.
Thank you. You were awesome. You were awesome.
If you have more questions, you can catch him. He has a very keen sense of dress, which is difficult to miss. He'll be around somewhere or at the bar or having beer at the party tonight.